Hey everyone, I'm Gadi Schwartz, NBC News correspondent and host of Stay Tuned and The Overview. Welcome to our Next Level Summit panel on disinformation and social news gathering. And with fake, misleading, and deceptive information infiltrating everything from health to politics, tackling disinformation has never been more important. Today, we're going to have a two-part panel. First, we're going to have NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins here with us, explain why the stakes have never been higher in the disinformation space on social media. Then, the NBC News social news gathering team is going to show you how to separate fact from fiction and then how to leverage what you're finding online to elevate your storytelling. We're going to hear from our colleagues Remo Abdelkader and Eric Carvin very soon. And of course, we want this to be a learning experience for you. So if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to click that Q&A box on the right side of your screen, and we're going to answer those questions live. But first, we've got Ben Collins, senior NBC reporter covering disinformation and the digital space. Here you can see some of his reporting covering QAnon, online fringe communities, or most recently, pieces of disinformation out there on Ukraine. Ben, thank you so much for being here with us today. Ben is #1_ on Twitter. I'm sure you've seen him fighting for truth every single day out there on Twitter. Ben, I just got to ask, set the scene for us. How much disinformation is out there these days?
It's everywhere, in part that is driven by the war that is now happening in Ukraine. It's a big part of the war for Russia, for example, is the information war. The idea that they can sort of set their own truth despite all the atrocities they're committing in real time. They have been successful over the last 10 years in doing this stuff, but they have also outlined a playbook for themselves that we've been able to follow. Because of that, we're able to sort of predict when they are going to the well on all of their disinformation tactics. So we're seeing it now. It's a matter of life and death now. I think in the last few years, people thought this may have been a political issue exclusively, maybe one where you could say like, maybe that's not necessarily true, but if you extrapolate it, it talks to a bigger truth. But in war, it's about, did this happen? Did this not happen? And it's important for us, I think, as journalists right now, to say, no, this is an objective reality. This thing took place, and these people are lying to you about it. So it's a really important part of our world at this moment.
And some of that disinformation that we're seeing overseas right now, is that some of the same type of disinformation, or at least some of the tactics that we saw during the last election cycle and the election cycle before that here in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely part of it. And I would say they use the same sort of tactics. They use the same bot farms, for example. They use fake people. They use larger networks of disinformation. I would say call them fake news sites, but what they use right now in these spaces, the same ones they've used for the last 5 to 10 years, they've just been honed and the technology is better. But the good news for us is the technology to detect this stuff is a lot better. And that's what we've been using recently. Our tools have evolved, and because of that, we've gotten better, I think, throughout the newsroom, throughout all of NBC News.
You were just talking about fake people. I know that sounds kind of outlandish, but I want to put up one of your recent articles about Ukraine. You tweeted this: I want you all to meet Vladimir Bondarenko. He's a blogger from Kiev who really hates the Ukrainian government. He also doesn't exist, according to Facebook. He's an invention of a Russian troll farm targeting Ukraine. His face was made by AI. So, okay, we know deepfakes are all the rage there. That looked like a very realistic person. How do you tell who's a real person and who's not? And do you have to do that for every tweet?
Not for every tweet, but when things take off in these spaces, I think it's important to say, is there a reason this person is hiding behind a fake identity? In this case, it was because that guy was created by a guy named Alexander Malkovich, who ran the Russian troll farm in 2016. And now he's shifted all of his money and, all of this oligarch money over to trying to defend the Ukrainian invasion. And that's why you would probably want to make up a person for that, because you've lost a lot of credibility since 2016, since, creating those sort of troll farms. Look, it's important to find these things out, but it's also important to realize that, it's the same tactic over and over again. So that's how we're able to find this guy out specifically. His face was made by a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. You can just create one right now. You can create a new fake face, new fake identity. A lot of them are better than others. If you get a bad one on the first try, you probably will, by the way. Just refresh it, and maybe you'll get a guy who looks like Vladimir. Very handsome guy.
Very handsome. What are the red flags when you see them? I mean, is there a telltale sign when you see somebody's face, or are they just indiscernible from real people at this point.
Right. So I want to give some credit to Jolene Kent, who's our correspondent on this. She had heard some rumblings at Facebook internally that they had taken down a bunch of Russian fake news sites. So she called Facebook and was like, what's up with this? And she was like, you know what, I'm going to call Ben Collins, see if we can get him on the call, see if he has any answers. So I was like, here, let me ask them if there's a specific website they can drive us to see what's going on there. So they brought us to They brought us to one of these websites called Ukraine Today, and I started looking around, and I saw Vladimir's face, and I was like, I know that face.
You had just seen him before.
A little bit too handsome,
right,
to be a real guy. And there's Vladimir's face, and what you can see here, a couple things. First of all, his ears are weird.
Right, okay.
His left ear are looking from our right. It's a little janky as compared to the other side. The other thing is, all of these faces made on this website, their eyes line up directly. So if you put them over each other, they make one composite character. Their eyes are always in the same exact spot in the frame.
So it's almost too symmetrical, like a robot made it, and robots are having trouble making.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And there's another woman named Irina on this website, another fake person. Her eyes, just if you overlay it, same exact spot on the page. There's a bunch of technology from this group called Sensity.ai. This is one of the like dozens and dozens of tools that you learn about over time that can detect this stuff in real time, right at the second. So you can send it over to them. They'll be like, yeah, of course, that's, there's 99.99% chance this is not a real person. So then, Joe and I went back to them and was like, is this one of the fake people? Is it Irina and Vladimir? And they're like, yeah, it's Irina and Vladimir. So that's how that reporting works.
It's so much verification almost at every level.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a question from one of the audience members. We received this question from Yadira Nieves. She's an assistant professor at the Universidad Interamericana de Puerto Rico. She asks, how do you navigate the current disinformation ecosystem to publish trustworthy information? We were talking a little bit about that, but this ecosystem, I mean, it just seems like it's minefields everywhere you look.
Yeah, look, it's really hard, and for regular people navigating through this, I don't think it's good to blame people for falling for fake accounts.
I would have totally fallen for that,
and I would fall for that too, right? It's just that I'd seen this over and over. This is my job to know what a fake face looks like, right? So you have to move along in this space as journalists, trying to be the person who is educating people, and not with judgment. I would say, it's not the role of the consumer to go and figure out every single thing is true or false. That's your job. So you have to be on top of the tools that can identify this stuff. It's really difficult because these tools evolve every day. People are really worried about deepfakes, for example. There was a deepfake of Vladimir Zelensky where he was basically conceding the war in Ukraine. It wasn't very good because the technology isn't good enough there yet. But there are all of these other smaller things. It's easy to make a fake website. It's easy to make a fake face. It's easy to make a fake identity. And that's what you can. We can educate our viewers on the idea of deepfakes, but you can also educate them and say, just because it's on the internet, just because it's text on the internet, doesn't necessarily make it true.
Got it. Is there a problem with a deep fake coming out, or you get bamboozled by a tweet, but then it sticks in the back of your head, even though you know it's true, or even though you know it's false? There's something about it that makes you think again and again, well, maybe it is the case. Right. Is that dangerous? The
point for Russian propaganda, for example, is never for people to accept it wholesale on the first try. It's to create this air of confusion, like a fog of war, as they say. Everything. It's to create this idea that it could be true, could be false, but it shifts what's called the Overton window in their head. The idea of what could be true in your head from objective reality, things like war crimes in Bucha, which is what we're seeing this week in Ukraine. It shifts that from that's clearly I'm seeing these dead people with my eyes to maybe these are not the dead people that I'm seeing. It tries to shift the idea of what can be true in your head, and that's the point of propaganda.
I got to ask, how did you get into this? How does one go into covering disinformation? I mean, it's almost like a specialty that you are pioneering right now. And for those that are out there that are thinking, look, there's tons of disinformation out there. I know that I can start separating some of that signal from the noise. Like, what's your advice to them? My story is really specific, but I think it is going to happen to all of us as time goes on. It just happened to me early on. My friend's girlfriend was shot and killed on live TV. Her name was Allison Parker. Right. She was an anchor and reporter in Roanoke, Virginia. And then I went to look up over the next few weeks information about my friend Chris. Mm-hmm. And all of the top hits on Google and YouTube said he was a member of the CIA, that he didn't exist, that Allison was sent to an island somewhere and not actually dead.
instead of, charities or things that, ways to give money to.
And so you're grieving, and then you're seeing all this disinformation.
Yeah, and his life is made twice as worse in the worst moment of his life, right? This was several years ago. Things have gotten better since then. More authoritative information gets pushed to the top faster. But that was because of all this reporting that we've done over the last few years. Not me, but the academic community focused on disinformation, and also just people realizing the real world harm. People will be, affected by this one way or another. Bad guys will be affected positively, largely, by disinformation. They will grow their wealth. They will grow their power. But there are random victims along the way, and eventually everyone is going to be a random victim of disinformation. So that's what I would say to everybody. This is one of the most important issues of our time. It affects people on the local level. It affects people, in the middle of war. It's not just a politics issue. It's the issue of, is there truth, and how can we get that truth out there to people?
It's something that, covering the news, we see time and time again that somebody that is struggling with a tragedy is now all of a sudden in the spotlight of the entire world, and dealing with disinformation. I can't even imagine, for those that will be victims to this, what are some of the things that you would have wished that you knew? What are some of the ways to kind of protect yourself?
Yeah. First of all, I would just say that, everybody is in their own bubble. Regardless of what that bubble is, it could be a good bubble, by the way. We, in the news business, we're generally in pretty good bubbles because we self-select, we go, we find people who we know are committed to the truth. But regardless, people are in their own spaces, and try to look out of it a little bit. Just try to find your way out of those spaces and see if maybe you're getting information just from one, just select group of people. And then from there, you can sort of broaden out from there. And you got to remember that the algorithms focus on sensationalism.
Right.
And sometimes that sensationalism is hate.
Right.
Or hate directed at a protected category. It has been like this since the start. It's the thing that works on social media. So if you feel your blood boiling a little bit, take a step back and realize that maybe you're being manipulated in some way.
Easier said than done.
Yes.
Ben, stay with me, because if you guys are watching and if you have any questions for Ben, we want him to answer them right here for you. So feel free to put them in the Q&A tab. But we've talked about what reporters can do while covering the disinformation space. Now we're going to give you all watching practical tips on how to conduct your own social news gathering. And to show you how you can do that, we've got a demonstration from a member of NBC News' social news gathering team. Take a look.
Hi everyone, my name is Rima Abdelkader. I am a senior social news gathering reporter with NBC News, and today we're going to talk about how we used public information to independently confirm some video content showing severe weather from Tropical Storm Elsa back in July of 2021. Our colleague flagged us this video tweet. Of course, this is the first time that we're seeing this, and we want to be able to spend some time looking at the source. When we check on the Twitter page for this user, this person appears to be a reporter from Jacksonville, Florida. But we just don't want to rely on what we're seeing on this Twitter page. We also could see that there is no verification mark, and we want to click on the website for this Jacksonville, Florida station. And we see that he is a reporter with this station. That's definitely making me feel a lot more comfortable knowing that this is coming from a local reporter. Then we navigate back and we want to be able to spend some time watching the video. I'm noticing that a date pops up, July 7th, 2021. I notice that it says front parking, and it's startling video. It's scary. There are strong wind gusts damaging the area. You see some debris flown around. We notice that this Twitter user mentions a place called Cannons. So I'll navigate to Google Maps, and I'm going to type in Cannons, possibly in Jacksonville, Florida. And I see that a Cannons does come up in the Jacksonville, Florida area. I notice that there is a highway, it's Phillips Highway, and I notice that there are some other businesses in this area. The reporter mentions that some of this debris is on the south side. Cannons is on the south side. So we're getting closer. I want to be able to check for confirmed reports of severe weather possibly hitting this area. So I want to go to the National Weather Service, and I want to be able to check storm reports from the Storm Prediction Center. We see for sure that Tropical Storm Elsa did make landfall in this area on July 7th. Doppler radar and public videos confirmed a tornado in Jacksonville, Florida. In addition to that, it states there was private property damage near Phillips Highway. So I'm going to go back to the video tweet and look for any more details. My colleague, Caroline Rednowski, noticed that on the bottom right-hand corner, there's a name, and it says SecureNet USA Inc. Now I'm going to go back to Google Maps, and I'm going to type in a possible place with that name in the Jacksonville, Florida area. Right away, I could see here that Cannons is nearby. And there does happen to be a place called SecureNet USA Inc. So I'm going to move this person icon closer. At the outset, we do see the name SecureNet USA in front of the building. And I notice that there is a camera up top of this building. And I see that there's a small white fence here that we noticed in the video. That helps us when we're trying to authenticate what it is we're seeing online with what we're seeing visually through geolocation and independent reporting from the National Weather Service in saying that this is reportable and it does reflect the severe weather footage that we're seeing circulating online. To quickly recap what it is we had done to verify this content, number one, you want to check that the source of the content is reliable. You also want to ask who, what, where, when, why, and how. And with that comes public information, geolocation, and independent reporting, which comes in handy. And with all of that, you have a recipe for success in reporting what is accurate.
And just like that, we learned a little bit about how to do your own social news gathering. I gotta tell you, I've seen them in action. She slowed it down to like a quarter of her speed there, because just watching them work during breaking news is like Minority Report. It's insane how fast they work. Joining us now is the senior social news gathering reporter you just met, Rima Abdelkader, along with Eric Carvin, the director of social news gathering. Thank you guys so much for being here. Eric, I want to start by showing you this map. It is a map of our social news gathering team and where they're based. It looks like we've got an international staff, which is amazing. Eric, how does that team work? I mean, you're talking different time zones, you're talking all across the planet. How collaborative is it?
Oh, hugely collaborative, and that map really gives you a taste of it. You can see that we cover a lot of time zones, and with those locations, we're able to cover 24 hours a day and do whatever we need to do. And we're on top of the news cycle. We're seeing what's going on, and we're trying to be responsive to the needs of the whole network and collaborate.
And Rima, what's the first thing you do immediately when you start to verify something? Is it just pull up Google? Where's your starting point?
Thanks, Gadi. I wish it were just that simple. You know, in that example that you just showed, it helps to have a situational analysis, right? You want to be able to check the source. And if you're able to find the original source, you know, you're actually in a good position to figure out whether or not it's reportable. But when taking some time out to review the content, you want to be able to ask, you know, those traditional questions, right? The 5 W's and the how. But you also want to try and figure out what kind of content is it, right? Where did it come from? Is it a member of the public? You know, is it from a media outlet? Is it from a government agency or a public agency? You know, that helps you get closer to the truth. And so as you're gathering information, you're gathering that independent editorial information for your reporting. And then, you know, once you have all of that together, you could figure out whether or not it's reportable.
Rima, I can't tell you how many times you've saved us from embarrassment. You've said, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't smell right, wait for the social news gathering team, and then the next thing you know, it turns out to be fake. So can you talk to us a little bit about what the stakes are here? How important is it to get things right?
You know, as Ben had discussed, you know, it's a tricky terrain, right, of misinformation, disinformation, content that's misdescribed. And so we're in this position to remain skeptical, right? It's a part of our job. But as you mentioned, you know, it's something that we have to keep in mind always when we're reviewing content online. And, you know, being accountable to the public and making sure that they're informed, we're informed, in the end, you know, we're all sharing the right information.
Accountability is so important. And Eric, if you could talk to us about the approach of the entire team, what do people need to know about some of those core tenets like accountability when it comes to social news gathering?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, social news gathering is news gathering. So even though we have a lot of tools and tricks to be able to do this specific work, ultimately we're reporting. The people on this team are reporters, and sticking to those core journalistic principles are really important to getting the job done, being willing to talk to people, track down officials, track down documents, and to be able to just get people on the phone to figure out what the truth is. Safety first. So this is really important. When we're reaching out to anybody, we want to make sure that we're not going to put anybody in danger, most importantly. If someone's caught up in the middle of a news event, the last thing you want to do is to have them responding to you instead of keeping themselves safe. And you also need to worry about keeping yourself safe and worrying about your own well-being as a journalist. It can be really difficult. Some of the images that we end up seeing doing this work, and also communicating with people who have experienced serious traumas, it can be difficult from an emotional and a mental standpoint. So be aware of yourself and speak up to someone you trust if you feel like it's getting difficult for you. Also, I always verify. You know, it can be tempting, especially when you're moving really quickly on a breaking news story, to just try to get something out there, and we understand that. But at the same time, the last thing you want to do is share something with the world and turn it to turn out not to be what you thought it was. So make sure that the verification's locked down, that you know what you're looking at, and that you know how to describe it before it goes anywhere. And yes, we want to be responsive, and it's really important for us to be chasing down whatever it is that the rest of the network needs and helping our colleagues. But there are also opportunities to be proactive in this work. So think about ways you could be driving the big story of the day forward by seeing what else is out there and trying to verify it, and take the lead on the reporting by using these tools.
Eric, it's so nice to hear you talk about how, you know, when journalists cover this a lot of times, like it seems like we're surrounded by it and inundated. This is something that we were actually talking about yesterday. Yep. Ben and I, we met for the first time in real life, and right away we just started talking about how difficult it was to kind of sometimes disconnect, and how important it is to realize that there's a greater world out there, and that greater world can be filled with good. What are some of the tips that you use to navigate through all this dreck, but at the same time, like, keep your eye on what's real and what's not?
Yeah, first of all, I would say set some limits. If you are going to be crawling 4chan all day, or some horrific online space, just try to take a step back. A good way of doing this for me now, this was not really available years ago. There are now a lot of ways to do this from a data perspective, to see keywords and work backwards from there. So you're not spending all day working on anecdotes and things like that. You're working on data. You're seeing big trends in the disinformation spaces. From there, you can say, oh, why is this keyword jumping in these particularly bad spaces? From there, you can work backwards. You can find the origin of specific pieces of propaganda. That's a lot smarter way of dealing with this than just inundating yourself with a lot of the bad stuff. I know, for example, Rima and Eric don't always have this ability to do this. Right. They are chasing some of the worst stuff that you can see, and just filing through this video. It's really hard. It's really difficult. And I think we should ask them that too as well. How exactly, Rima, for example, how do you deal with this? How do you guys take a step back in these moments?
Yeah, Rima and Eric, I mean, what does it look like when you guys get an assignment, you've spent all day looking at some of this? Do you step back? Do you have the ability to kind of disconnect from everything?
So just like that main covenant in journalism, right? We're reviewing this material without fear of favor. And our team is very much on the digital front lines when it comes to this content. And our colleagues are relying on us, right, to review it and make sure that, what is being shared is accurate. And if it's not, to be in a position to make sure that, we're not in a position of reporting that live on air when it's, incorrect or could put someone at a disadvantage. And, to your question, Ben, when it comes to this material, especially when it involves traumatic events, at the end of the day, we're human, right? There have been points where my colleagues and I, have taken it very personally, and it's important to step away for a little while, and we each have each other's backs, in terms of picking up the story when it comes to it, just like during this crisis in Ukraine and in other conflicts, just being able to embrace that empathy, right? And to look to each other in terms of, what it is we're seeing and, how could we come to terms with this material before we share it with our colleagues.
I want to ask one other question. So when you work in news, whether you're out in the field or now at the social news gathering desk, one of the things that you have to do that is the most difficult thing, I think, for a journalist to do is to reach out and verify something from somebody that may be grieving. And unfortunately, in journalism, that verification is so important. And I can't tell you how many times, that means knocking on somebody's door who just had a loved one pass away. And then it turns out that knocking on that door opened up a whole different side to that story that we never knew. All of a sudden, the family has proof that what the police said happened didn't necessarily happen. And then it becomes the integral part of journalism. But without knocking on that door or without reaching out to family in that most difficult time, you wouldn't have that. So we see that happening on social media with everybody also able to see that. Rima, Eric, what are some of the things that you guys do when you're reaching out to somebody for verification that may have been involved in a traumatic experience?
I could start,
yeah,
and
sure.
Eric can jump in here. You want to be able to consider the social media users' safety, right? And if they're in a position to speak with you, and if they respectfully decline, then we should respect their decision, not to speak to a reporter. And as you mentioned, Gadi, when it comes to digital sources of information, tone is left out, right? So you have to consider that when you're reaching out to someone. So, that traditional, door knock, has now become that Facebook, knock. And then you also have, that Instagram wall and so on. And you want to be able to reach out, ask how that social media user is doing, and introduce yourself. It's really important that you're transparent about that. And also what your intention is in reaching out, because that builds trust and it negates that confusion as to why they're being reached out to by a reporter.
And here's an audience question for Eric. Charlie says a lot of times you get information from the ground, from sources, and you can't be 100% certain that that's accurate. How much certainty is needed, and what's considered a reliable source?
Yeah, so we consider verification and certainty to be not a negotiable part of this process. We really want to be completely sure that we know what we're talking about here. It's not, if you're 80% sure, that's a pretty big window of doubt, and it may seem like an overreach to say, well, how can you possibly get to 100%? But sometimes you have to flood the zone with your reporting. Sometimes it's not about like, is this one source good enough? It's more like there are 7 sources of information, and between all of them, we can get to 100%. And that's really the goal, is to really get to that certainty. And if we're not there, we have to have the confidence in our reporting abilities to say, no, we really shouldn't use this, and we hold stuff back that would be really a valuable part of the story because we're not sure. We really need to be sure.
We have a lot more questions coming in from the audience. This one's for Rima. Alexis says, I've worked for stations that say it's okay to use social media posts for stories as long as you credit that profile. But I've also worked for stations that make people sign a release form, but people are not willing or are submitting release forms in time. How do you handle that?
That's a great question. So, for the news organization that we work with at NBC News, it really depends on, the editorial standards with regards to, what footage you report for air. Sometimes, it's not clear who the source is. But, to your question about using footage from social media users, the type of social media etiquette, that we have here is we ask permission, for that footage, especially if it's clear who the social media user is in owning that content. So I would just suggest, speaking with your editorial department on, how best to handle that.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, what's your core takeaway when it comes to social news gathering? I mean, it almost feels like, we're getting to a point where there's more disinformation out there than there's misinformation. How do you see the future developing?
I think this is the very beginning of this stuff. And I also think that this is a thing that newsrooms have to take seriously on more than just a niche level. It can't just be a couple of people who are checking in on this stuff every once in a while. I will say that there is a space for this in non-English communities that is just not covered. We focus on this through American politics because there were targeted attacks in the American political system in 2016. But it's not just about that. People could do this for businesses. They can launch disinformation campaigns for themselves, and it works in various different mediums. Today, for example, a bunch of people sent me a postcard they got telling me how QAnon was real in the mail.
Wow.
So this is infiltrating every part of our life. And just because you see it out there and it's not in English or it's not being covered correctly, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be covered. It just means it hasn't been covered yet.
Sounds like the need for more journalists is greater than ever.
Exactly.
We've got another question for you, Ben, from the audience. Amara in our audience asks, is there any way to mitigate the spread of disinformation on social media as it happens? Or is this really just about doing damage control after the fact?
There is. There absolutely is. There are repeat offenders who you can say, this guy made this thing up earlier in the year about this other thing. This is what we do with Russian propaganda. We outline exactly what the playbook is, for example. So that's a way to do it from a journalistic perspective, is say, this is how this thing this is the flight path of disinformation. Get out ahead of this sort of thing. That said, you can also, go to platforms and say, what are you guys doing exactly? How are you guys limiting this stuff? How are you guys trying to make it so the disinformation isn't at the top instead of the real stuff? It's accountability journalism. You can go to them and say, you guys hold the keys to what people see. And we just need to know a little bit more. You need to be more transparent with the public about how that information is getting to people.
Are these tech platforms usually pretty responsive? Do they have teams dedicated for this, or is there a lot of pushback?
When I started this 5 or 6 years ago, there was no such thing as a disinformation unit at any of these companies. Now they are thousands and thousands of people all throughout the world, frankly. CEOs, people like Mark Zuckerberg, previously wrote this off as, a difference of opinion or something like that. And then they realized that their objective reality, their bottom line, was being affected by this stuff. So things have changed over the last few years. It's only going to get more like this. Like the bad stuff, the bad actors have realized what works, and they've realized they can literally capitalize on this. They can make a lot of money on this. So there are going to be defenses built up against this. It's just like the information war. It's too bad that Alex Jones came up with the word InfoWars before everybody else did, because that's what this is.
It really comes down to a lot of the tech platforms. They may have teams that are fighting against this, but so much of it is driven by algorithms and engagement, and nothing engages like a fight or a train wreck or something that's so sensational but not at all true. Is there accountability when it comes to the development and the implementation of some of these algorithms?
Absolutely, yes. My colleague Brandy Zadrozny said, like, if this was the 1930s or 40s, it would be like covering the telephone, right? You're covering the whole platform. You're covering, if you're covering supermarkets, you're not just covering, the cover of the Oreos box. You're covering to see if there's a salmonella outbreak or something like that. If the food is diseased, people should know about it, basically. This is an entirely new way people get information. We should cover it at the infrastructure level just as much as we cover the output of that infrastructure.
And Eric, I want to ask you, are you starting to see the speed in which disinformation travels slowing down? Are they going as viral? Are they being seen as many people? Or is there progress being made from where you sit?
It's hard to see really consistent progress. I think what you see is almost like an arms race where the people who are trying to spread false information are finding new techniques, and it's a matter of trying to keep up with it. And I wouldn't say that there's been sort of widespread progress, but I think at news organizations, the best thing that we can do, in addition to on occasion pointing out falsehoods, is just battle the false with the true, which means really work as hard as we can to make sure people know about the real things that are happening and the real images that are actually from important news events, and really focus on that as much as possible. It's the best we can do. Ultimately, the platforms I need to be part of the solution, as Ben was talking about, and I think a lot of them are trying to be. But there's a long road ahead, and it keeps changing. I don't know if it's improving.
Here's a question for you, Rima. William asks, how do you react to a senior manager whose goal is to publish first, verify later, just for the sake of beating competitors?
So, I mean, if I were in that position, I would not follow that advice. You know, I would tell my manager that there's a better way to handle that, and that comes down to transparency. You know, you want to be able to tell, you know, your viewers, your readers, what it is you know and what it is you don't know. You know, that way, you know, they're following, you know, this journey with you, you know, in terms of news gathering and truth telling. So that's what I would suggest if you're in that position. For our colleague that asked that question.
I mean, and I asked that, but I know that there's been times where I'm like, hey, can we go with this? Is this confirmed? We have that family feel in a lot of our newsrooms that kind of allow for that push and pull. And I think that push and pull is important in all newsrooms. But is that something that you've learned how to deal with? Because you're so diplomatic about all of this. And I know when you're getting into the career, you might just be so frustrated and fired up about either being first or frustrated and fired up about, like, no, we need to wait until the police say that it's confirmed. What's the middle ground, and how do you navigate it?
You know, it comes down to good journalistic judgment. You know, I attended the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, and I remember the dean at the time, you know, Dean Shepard, you know, he would often bring up that it's important to, you know, be accurate. You know, it's not about being first. And so I kind of have carried that with me. And, you know, as you mentioned, Gadi, you know, in the end, we're all working together, right? So if one person gets it wrong, we all get it wrong. So it's better to be right.
And Ben, I want to ask, we've been talking a lot about journalists, but what's your core takeaway from people that are just out there? They have a Twitter account, they're living their lives, but they're surrounded by disinformation. How do they proceed?
First of all, I would say that it's not all a bummer. We have all this, like you called it Minority Report earlier. That's exactly what it is. I think there was a 4-year span where we were defenseless against this sort of thing. But now it's actually kind of interesting. It's kind of fun, you know. If you can trace back, you know, the beginnings of a disinformation campaign and find the bad guys, find the villains. There's real storytelling here. It's really interesting. And I think that's what we're realizing in the news too, is that consumers, people who read this stuff, they're really interested in this. They have a feeling something is up on social media, and they want answers for this stuff. We can provide them those tools, so it's not just us always doing the work. We can say, hey, go to these sites, you know, do the legwork for yourself, because it's kind of fun, it's kind of interesting.
We've got another question for Rima. Luca asks, how can one begin their career path towards becoming a part of this social news gathering team, hopefully at NBC News?
We actually have an opening right now. You know,
perfect. Yeah, there's a lot of disinformation and social out there.
Yeah, you know, just to add, you know, all of us kind of do this, right? We're in this evolving field. A lot of the tools that we use are imperfect. So you want to be able to just stay on top of the latest and the greatest, right? That could help you get closer to the truth. So, if I were you, check out NBC Academy's website. We actually have a training out there about what it is we do. So I would start there and then, navigate to other sources as well, like First Draft as well.
And stick around, because guess what? We're going to allow you to talk to a bunch of recruiters right here at NBC. You're going to hear from all of our leaders too. So we're doing all of that for you that are watching right now. Eric, what's the most important thing that people need to know about social news gathering?
So I would say the key takeaway, and this kind of relates to what Rima was just talking about now, is that if you're doing this work, you are a journalist. Remember that. Remember that every second that you're doing this work. You need to hold on to those critical thinking skills, to the skepticism that you've learned about doing this work. Question everything you see, confirm everything you see, focus on every little detail. You really need to scrutinize the details to get this stuff right. So just be, and when we talk about, Rima mentioned, we are hiring. And when we're looking for new people to do this work, sure, we love it when people have done it before specifically, but if not, we're just looking for great journalists who have great attention to detail, who have sort of the energy to just dive into these projects, and who understand how information and content travel on the web. So focus on those core reporting skills and the tools. Anyone can learn the tools, but just make sure you have those principles intact.
And those principles are something that are instilled in us from J school all the way through. I know that we talk about them here at work a lot. But when you talk about who's a journalist, Ben, it seems like these days, like anybody that has a phone, anybody that has access to an RSS feed or Twitter or anything like that, they're basically a journalist, right?
Yeah, if you do it right, that's definitely true. And I've seen some what we would call OSINT reporting, open source intelligence reporting, on TikTok from teenagers who don't even know they're doing it, right? They're just like, this seems funny, and they kind of go down the rabbit hole, and they're like, if you go to this thing, you go to this thing. People are doing this by themselves. That is reporting. The word for it on TikTok is just not reporting, right?
Right.
So look, we're in a brave new world with this stuff, and I will say, listen to the kids. In a lot of ways, they grew up with this. They know better. They have a good feel for what's going on here. Sometimes the best addition to a newsroom is like a 22-year-old who knows how to use TikTok better than any of us do. Mm-hmm. So that would be a little bit of advice here in terms of where this is going forward. But yeah, we are all doing this one-to-one. We're all trying to figure out what's true out there, in part because of how polluted the information ecosystem is. Listen to everybody. Some people might have better tips and tricks, and you would never even believe it.
And for somebody that maybe wants to be a journalist or is on the fence, they know how to do it. They've seen those TikToks. They have the skills. What do you think are the principles that people that are starting to publish to potentially thousands, even millions of people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, remember that anything can go viral. But first of all, especially if you're making a pretty big claim about something, that you think something's real or fake, or there was the days before learning that somebody didn't actually exist, saying out loud in public, like, this guy doesn't exist. It's still like, before you print that, you're like, we got to really make sure this guy doesn't exist. Thankfully there is like we know for sure based on all this data that we have, but you have to be really careful at this moment, because things can go viral for pretty much no reason, literally overnight. You don't have to be famous for it. You don't have to have a blue check mark next to your name on any of these, on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Just be careful. Just be careful out there, because it's an ecosystem that rewards the sensational no matter what.
And Rima, we're running against the clock here, but if you had a final thought, a guiding principle to sum it up, what would it be?
I think it's becoming apparent that social news gathering is very vital, for a news operation. And, you had mentioned this to Ben earlier. We're very much the pioneers, in this field. And, our colleagues are relying on us when it comes to navigating digital sources of information. So, I would just leave some thoughts in saying that, still hold on to those, traditional methods of reporting, while you navigate this new terrain.
The pioneers, that's so Perfectly said. Thank you guys so much, Ben, Eric, Rima, for joining us today. And thank you all for watching and asking so many great questions. We hope you enjoyed this session. Now stick around because our next session is starting in just minutes at 1 p.m. Eastern with the chairman of the NBCU News Group, Cesar Conde. That is happening right here on the main stage, so don't go away. And then immediately following Cesar's fireside chat, you're going to be able to head into our career expo rooms where you can talk live to newsroom leaders and top recruiters about opportunities available right now. Thanks so much for joining us.